Greetings, everyone. My name is Amy Banks, and I would like to welcome you all to our webinar, Incorporating International Students into Emergency Management and Planning. This webinar is being hosted by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students in collaboration with the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools, or REMS, Technical Assistance TA Center. This webinar is designed to provide an in-depth review of the A Closer Look section on international students as put forth in the Obama administration's recently released Guide for Developing High-Quality Emergency Operations Plans for Institutions of Higher Education. This new guide, developed by ED in collaboration with the U.S. Departments of Homeland Security, led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Justice, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, and Health and Human Services, represent the culmination of years of work by the federal government. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues from the REMS TA Center.
Thank you, Amy. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Our call today is set so that only our presenters can speak to the group. However, we will be taking questions. You may submit your questions at any time during the webinar using the online Q&A chat function located on the lower right side of your screen. Our presenters will respond to questions during the Q&A session at the end of the training in the order in which they are received and as time permits. Just above the Q&A chat window on your screen, you will see a file share pod that contains a downloadable PDF of today's webinar slides. Please click on the file name and then click the Download Files button to save the webinar slides to your computer. Now let's get started. Our agenda for today's webinar is as follows. First, we'll briefly discuss how the Guide for Developing High-Quality Emergency Operations Plans for Institutions of Higher Education came about through the President's Now is the Time plan. Then we'll do a brief review of the Higher Ed Guide, followed by the steps in the process of developing a plan and how they relate to international students. We will then introduce you to the Closer Look section of the guide pertaining to the international students and provide an overview of the international student process. Following, we will discuss the unique needs of international students/scholars and discuss international students in relation to EOPs before discussing some scenarios in recent history where international student considerations are highlighted. Finally, we will provide some resources and open up our question and answer portion of the webinar before we wrap up. Today, our presenters include Amy Banks of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students, Center for School Preparedness. Amy is part of the team within ED that addresses school and higher education emergency management and planning, and participated as part of the ED team in the creation of the guides that include this Closer Look topic on international students. Amy will be providing some context for the development and context of the guides and content of the guides, specifically the guide that pertains to institutions of higher education. Our interagency partners presenting today include Jeffrey Hoffman, Director of the Office of Counterterrorism and Security Preparedness at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Lauren Kielsmeyer, the Executive Director of Academic Engagement at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Rachel Canty, Associate Deputy Director, DHS, U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and Nancy McCarthy, Consular Officer, U.S. Department of State, or DOS, Bureau of Consular Affairs. Jeffrey Hoffman advises FEMA's Deputy Administrator on prevention and protection policy issues and serves as the Protection and National Preparedness Directorate's lead for federal interagency law enforcement and intelligence community partners. Additionally, he oversees and directs numerous prevention and protection-related programs, including the Joint Counterterrorism Awareness Workshop Series and the Homeland Security Fusion Center Technical Assistance Program. Lauren Kielsmeyer works to build and leverage relationships with the academic community to support DHS's key mission areas. She served as Chief of Staff for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from 2009 to June 2011. She came to DHS from Arizona, where she previously served in senior policy and management roles in the administration of former Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, including serving as the governor's education policy advisor. She was also responsible for state-level AmeriCorps and youth development programs and funding, as well as several state-level governor-appointed advisory bodies, including Governor's P20 Council, Arizona State Citizen Corps Council, Governor's Commission on Service and Volunteerism, Arizona Statewide Youth Development Task Force, and Governor's Youth Commission. Nancy McCarthy is a consular officer currently serving in the Bureau of Consular Affairs Visa Office and provides policy and procedural guidance on student and exchange visitor visa issues to consular offices in embassies and consulates worldwide. And Rachel Canty oversees certification and compliance of schools enrolling international students. Previously within ICE, she also served as the Acting Assistant Director of the Office of Policy from 2011 to 2012. From 2009 to 2011, Ms. Canty was the Chief of Staff for Secure Communities within ICE's enforcement and removal operations. Amy?
Thanks, Sean. In January of 2013, the President put forward his Now is the Time plan to reduce gun violence. One of the executive actions put forth in his plan was the development of 3 new guides by the Departments of Education, Justice led by FBI, Homeland Security led by FEMA, and Health and Human Services. These new guides, they help K-12 schools, institutions of higher education, hereafter referred to as IHEs, and houses of worship develop and implement high-quality emergency operations plans, hereafter referred to as EOPs. These guides are not prescriptive. Rather, they describe the principles and processes that help schools ensure schools, IHEs, and houses of worship emergency management and planning efforts are aligned with the emergency planning practices at the national, state, and local levels. Specifically, the IHE guide focuses on key principles for developing a comprehensive EOP for an IHE, the planning process for developing, implementing, and refining an EOP for an IHE, the form, function, and content of an IHE EOP plan, and various topics that support emergency operations planning, including the CLARI Act, information sharing, campus public safety, active shooter situations, and psychological first aid. In addition, the IHE guide aligns with and builds upon years of emergency planning work by the federal government. The guide reflects an all-hazards approach to include both natural and man-made disasters. It provides IHEs with an approach to planning that includes walking through various emergency scenarios and creating a course of action for each objective. The guides put a new emphasis on who should be included in the planning process, and these guides can be used to not only create new plans, but also to revise and update an existing plan. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Assman from FEMA. Jeff?
Thanks, Amy, and greetings, folks. As mentioned, my name is Jeff Hoffman. I currently serve as the Director for the Office of Counterterrorism and Security Preparedness at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I'd like to take a quick moment and express our appreciation to our close colleagues at the Department of Ed for hosting and sponsoring this event, our DHS colleagues from ICE and from the Department of State. The Department of Homeland Security was extremely pleased to work with our federal partners across the government in developing the guide for institutions of higher education. As you know, getting multiple agencies to come to the table and develop guidance can be a challenge. This effort is really a great accomplishment. As you will see, this guide combines our collective expertise and builds upon hard work our agencies have already done and resulted in the best possible guidance on how to prevent, protect, mitigate, respond to, and recover from emergency situations. We are especially pleased that this document included the Closer Look section on international students as a key topic for planners to address during emergency management planning. You know, the Department of Homeland Security plays a significant role in the area of international students, which you will hear more about throughout today's presentation. We understand that the international student population can be overlooked in emergency operation planning and guidance on how to include this population in the planning process. But as we have learned from past events, it's important for schools to understand the unique needs of international students and their own responsibilities in addressing the challenges international students may present. Incorporating these needs into the emergency management planning process not only helps ensure students and security of international student populations, but enhances the overall preparedness of our institutions of higher education and their surrounding communities. The development of this guide presented an opportunity to raise awareness of this important group, and we are pleased to be able to provide this information and guidance to institutions. Please. We will explain in greater detail that our international student populations within the institutions have their own unique needs that must be taken into consideration throughout the emergency management planning process, as you will see outlined here. As you read the guide, you will see it's critical to engage and involve the right people as part of the collaborative planning team for your EOP, and that includes the international student staff of any given institution. As a first step in the planning process, you should consider including key personnel at your international students and scholar offices as members of the core team. This includes the principal designated school official, also known as the PDSO, and the responsible officer, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. Understanding the situation and assessing the risk is a critical part of the process described in step 2. When developing your institution's EOP, assess the unique needs of the challenges presented by the international student population. When determining the overall goals and objectives for your EOP, the third step in the process, it's important to include specific goals that address or take into consideration international students. Step 4 of the process involves developing the plan itself and identifying courses of action in emergency situations, keeping in mind that procedures identified for your institution regarding international students must be unique to other courses of action within the EOP. As we will cover in greater detail, the unpredictability of an emergency requires consideration of your institution's process for issues involving international students, such as communication and safety concerns. We will cover these and various others through the rest of the webinar. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Lauren Kilsmeyer, from the Office of DHS Academic Engagement, who will speak more about the international student process. Thank you again for joining us today.
Hello everyone, I'm Lauren Kilsmeyer, Executive Director for Academic Engagement at DHS. As Mr. Hoffman mentioned earlier, international students are an important population for colleges and universities to incorporate into their emergency management planning process for a variety of reasons. There are approximately 800,000 international students and scholars currently studying in the U.S. at academic institutions ranging from vocational schools to large research institutions. And while they're here, they become important members of their campus communities, participating in activities both inside and outside of the classroom. The sheer size of this population makes it crucial for institutions of higher ed to plan for the appropriate actions needed when an emergency situation occurs. But more importantly, international students have a set of unique needs and challenges beyond those of domestic students during crises. These needs vary from communication challenges to enforcement issues. As well, a wide range of individuals and organizations are involved when international students are affected by crises, both large and small. Close coordination between institutions of higher ed and local, state, and federal law enforcement is needed when international students may become victims of events, both natural and man-made. We'll go into more detail about these unique needs and the ways institutions of higher ed can plan for them in a moment. Before we delve deeper into the closer look section on international students, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the international student process. Knowing more about the process and the various entities involved can help us better understand how international students should be incorporated in the emergency management planning process. Multiple government agencies are involved in this process, from recruiting them to studying in the U.S. to enforcing the laws that govern their time here. The Department of State typically acts as the first point of contact with international students. They are responsible for issuing visas and designating program sponsors, as well as overseeing the exchange visitor program. Nancy McCarthy has joined us from the Department of State's Bureau of Consular Affairs, and she'll speak in more detail about their involvement in a moment. The Department of Homeland Security plays a significant role, and multiple agencies within the department are involved in various aspects. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, directly interacts with international students as they enter and exit the U.S. at designated points of entry. The officers who work at these ports of entry are responsible for inspecting the necessary paperwork international students must have in order to legally study in the U.S. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, is responsible for administering the various benefits international students may be eligible for during their time in America. And U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and in particular, the Student and Exchange Visitor Program within ICE, plays a significant role in monitoring international students while they're here, as well as certifying the academic institutions that host them. Finally, the Department of Justice, specifically the FBI, may aid in criminal investigations involving international students. I would now like to turn it over to Nancy McCarthy from the Department of State, who will explain more about the role her agency plays in the international student process.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy McCarthy. I'm a Foreign Service Consular Officer working for the Department of State in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, currently assigned to the Visa Office here in Washington, D.C. I'm very pleased to be part of this group. It's very important to us that we work as a team with our colleagues in other federal agencies to make sure that international students and exchange visitors have the best possible experiences when they come to the United States to be with us for their period of time. Our work is done overseas in embassies and consulates. It depends very directly on the designation of program sponsors that is undertaken by our sister bureau in the Department of State, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and it depends heavily on the work that SEVP, Student and Exchange Visitor Programs, do in certifying institutions to issue the I-20. Those documents allow individuals to apply for student or exchange visitor visas and allow us as consular officers to make adjudicatory decisions about their participation in programs here in the United States. We are committed to issuing visas to all qualified students and exchange visitors, and we, as a policy matter, expedite visa interview appointments and any processing that needs to take place prior to visa issuance so that those individuals can make it to their programs on time. We are concerned about health, safety, and welfare, as our colleagues are, but that's not our primary concern in the visa process. We seek to be well informed about initiatives here in the United States that affect international students to whom we've issued visas. We sometimes are called upon in the course of our duties to talk about such matters to our overseas interlocutors or family members, perhaps, if issues have occurred. Again, we are an overseas part of this and help set in motion the movement of international students and exchange visitors to come here to the United States. I will now pass on to my colleague at SEVP, Rachel Canty. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Canty, and I serve as the Deputy Director at the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, also known as SEVP, which is part of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. As Nils Kilsmeyer mentioned, SEVP is a program within ICE that's heavily involved in the international student process, working closely with students and schools that enroll them. The core mission of SEVP is to ensure the integrity of the non-immigrant visa system, and we do that through certifying and recertifying schools to enroll international students. No school can enroll an international student without being certified by our office. We also monitor school and student compliance, craft international student regulations and guidance for school officials and students, and perform outreach to schools and academic associations. To monitor school and student compliance, ICE and SEVP use the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System known as SEVIS, which is an online database that tracks students and scholars who study in the United States from their initial application to the completion of their studies. All colleges and universities certified by SEVP to enroll international students must have a designated school official known as a DSO, on campus. The DSOs maintain responsibility for advising international students and inputting data into SEVIS regarding student programs, location, and status. This information assists us in monitoring international students' compliance with immigration law. As Ms. Kilsmeyer mentioned earlier, international students have unique needs that institutions of higher education should consider when planning for emergencies. International students come from all over the world to study here and have varying levels of comfort with the English language. In crafting communications to students, emergency management officials within institutions of higher education must be cognizant of the issues presented by potential language barriers. Being able to quickly and effectively communicate with these students during an emergency is important for their safety and safety of others. Unlike domestic students, international students are not able to return home as easily during an emergency. This requires institutions to consider temporary housing or shelter, potentially for a significant number of students. International students also need to know how to maintain their immigration status and other timely information about their options, such as transferring if they are unable to continue their studies at current school if an emergency occurs. In order to maintain their immigration status, international students are required to be enrolled in a full course of study. During an emergency, particularly when an institution is unable to operate, this requirement presents additional challenges for international students. Also, because they are also responsible for reporting their status and location to their DSO, they must have the ability to do so during an emergency situation. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the schools that host international students and scholars also have important responsibilities, especially when it comes to dealing with crises. Making timely updates to SEVIS to reflect the status and location of international students and scholars, as well as communicating with federal officials when necessary, are important actions schools must take during emergencies. International students also highlight the need for close communication between school officials and local, state, and federal authorities. An international student may be a victim or alleged perpetrator in certain emergency situations. School officials must be able to quickly and accurately communicate with authorities to ensure proper notifications are made or possibly assist in law enforcement investigations. This is made possible by understanding the unique need of international students and the role of various agencies in their international student processes. Institutions of higher education should consider several actions to incorporate the needs of international students when planning for emergencies. First, understand the key issues related to international students in emergency management scenarios. I addressed some of the unique challenges associated with international students. Understanding these challenges and how they may affect emergency operations plans will improve the institution's ability to communicate and respond. Having knowledge of the various issues and challenges that arise is an important first step. Incorporate the principal designated school official, also known as the PDSO, the school's international student office, and appropriate law enforcement points of contact into the emergency operations plans. Do you know the PDSO on your campus and how to reach him or her during an emergency? Are they part of the planning process or involved in exercises? For law enforcement, do you maintain a current list of appropriate points of contact? How do you involve them in planning and exercises? Define policies for staff and international students to support continuity of operations during crises. Establish processes for international students to communicate to the school their location, safety concerns, and short and long-term plans. This may be done by providing briefings to international students during orientation or by sending tailored tips to the international students through the PDSO. Incorporate the PDSO and other key international student contacts into the crisis response process. Involve them in the planning stage, in exercises, and in response. Develop the ability to access SEVIS from alternate facilities or remote locations. DHS reporting requirements continue during an emergency, highlighting the need for contingency planning. If servers are affected, is there another method of gaining access to SEVIS? Finally, support the PDSO and other key international student contacts in understanding the principles of emergency management and their roles in the school's emergency management plan. By involving them in the development of emergency operation plans, emergency managers can empower them and improve responses during crises. Recent examples of both natural and man-made disasters illustrate the importance of incorporating the needs of international students into the emergency management planning process. Hurricane Katrina forced several schools throughout the Gulf Coast region to close, leaving thousands of international students displaced. Many of these students evacuated without taking critical immigration documents with them, which affected their ability to maintain their status. This situation highlighted the need for close communication and coordination between students, schools, and local, state, and federal authorities. A more recent example, the Boston Marathon bombing, also demonstrated the need for timely and appropriate communication. Sadly, a Chinese graduate student was among the victims of the tragedy, which required notification to both DHS and the Department of State. Finally, the flooding in Colorado has experienced over the past few weeks has caused several schools to close. An international student was briefly unaccounted for in the aftermath, again highlighting the need for close communication and coordination between students, schools, and local, state, and federal authorities. These are only 3 scenarios, but represent some of the challenges institutions of higher education and highlight the need to incorporate international students into emergency operations planning. So now we're going to go over some of the steps in the planning process. With each institution of higher education, the international student situation has its own unique traits that must be taken into consideration. In step 1, include the principal designated school official, also known as the PDSO, and responsible officer, also known as the RO, and the institution of higher education's international student and scholar office points of contact into the core planning team for your planning processes. And so you understand, so the PDSO is for the students who are there matriculating as students, and the responsible officer, RO, is for students or professors who are there under exchange visitor programs. So they may be professors, they may be people there like on different kind of scholarships or different kind of exchange programs the United States runs. So they may be students under both of them. In step 2, in an assessment of risk, we recommend that IHEs assess the unique needs of and challenges presented by the international student population. And that should be unique to your student population. You may have more of one nationality or another, and that may be able to present unique needs for you. In step 3, when determining goals and objectives for your EOP, it's important to create goals and objectives that address or take into consideration international students. In step 4, the course of action identified for your IHE regarding international students may be unique to other courses of action within your EOP. Finally, keep in mind that procedures identified for your school regarding international students may be unique to other courses of action. The unpredictability of an emergency requires consideration of your processes for issues involving international students, such as communication and safety concerns. We hope the information covered today has given you a greater understanding of international students and will ultimately help in your school's emergency management planning process. At this time, we would like to open it up to any questions you may have.
Okay, thanks. Just a reminder, we'll now take a few questions from our participants. Remember to pose your question using the Q&A chat function on the lower right side of your computer screen.
All right, Sean, it looks like we have our first question, and our first question reads, during an emergency, how soon does an international student have to report their new location if they had to evacuate?
This is Rachel Canny from SEVP. That is an excellent question. As soon as possible, really, is the answer we'd give. We understand the circumstances, and so we would like them to report as soon as possible to the DSOs and the PDSOs and into CVIS where they are located, and if it's going to be temporary, where they're going to be located more permanently. But we also understand the situation, so it's going to be sort of a fluid answer for that. But as soon as possible is really the answer.
Okay, thank you. Our second question is this. What arrangements are IHEs required to make to provide temporary housing to international students during an emergency? Are there any examples of ways that IHEs have addressed this?
That is another excellent question. Schools are not required to provide temporary housing. However, the students may have nowhere else to go. For example, during Katrina, when the Gulf Coast and school had just started, there really was no place for students to go, and I know the schools helped relocate students. But they do have a responsibility to ensure that they know where the students are located and that they know where the students will be continuing on, and if they can't help assist them just to help them find those resources to help them locate a place to be.
Great, thank you. And I have another question. What options, besides transferring to another school, do international students have to ensure that they're enrolled in a full course of study if they're displaced by an emergency?
That is a very tough question because they don't really have any other options. However, During extreme emergencies that affect a lot of students, what we would ask is that the schools contact SEVP and we will work something out. Again, during Katrina, which is one of the largest scale disasters that we had to work with in the school environment, we allowed students to drop below a full course of study during that semester because it was very clear that this wasn't something that a week later students were going to be back in class, and we needed to give them some time to get things back together. So there aren't many options, but in true emergencies that affect large numbers of students or large numbers of schools, we would say, please contact SEVP and we'll work as closely as possible with you. Our goal is not to hold students to some high standard that they cannot meet. It's to make sure we know where students are, we know that they're here in their lawful immigration status, but we understand what happens day to day.
Okay, great. Let's wait just a moment, see if we have any more questions that come in. Those are really great questions. Thank you. All right. It looks like up on the screen we do have some additional resources for people to access. These are resources that pertain specifically to the guide and to the topic of international students. The REMS TA Center and the White House website are just a few places, in addition to all the federal partner agencies, where you can access and download these 3 guides. The REMS TA Center also provides a list of resources supporting each guide. And here on the screen you can see a link that directs you to the resource list specific to the IHE guide. In addition, DHS and DOS also have resources available to you in support of international students. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to the REMS TA Center.
Thank you. This is a really quick overview for the REMS TA Center website. The resources on the REMS TA Center website support the development of comprehensive emergency operation plans for schools and institutions of higher education. Our searchable resource repository contains proven practices, tools, and other items developed by school emergency managers pertinent to the needs of local education agencies and IHEs as they engage in the process of emergency operations planning. Downloadable copies of the guides for developing high-quality school and IHE emergency operations plans, as well as supporting resource sheets for each, are also available on the website. Archives of past webinars, including those providing an overview of the guides, as well as on special topics such as threat assessment, infectious diseases, and lockdown and evacuation procedure, are also available. The guides and resources are available now in the resources section of the site, and the archived presentation and other supporting documents for today's webinar will be available in the webinars section in approximately 5 to 7 business days. We also maintain a dedicated electronic mail address and a toll-free telephone number, which is 1-855-781-REMS, or 7367, by which requests for technical assistance on topics pertaining to emergency operations planning for schools and IHEs may be submitted. I would like to thank everyone again for joining us, and this wraps up the webinar. Thank you very much.